From Advancing American Freedom, Hans von Spakovsky is joining me on the program to talk about this raft of Supreme Court decisions that came out, specifically the big ones. And we will start with birthright citizenship. Hi, Hans. Thanks for joining me again.
Sure, although I wish we had something better to talk about.
Yeah, I guess, what we thought was going to happen, I'm judging from people like you and others who said, look, I don't think we're going to win on this case, but we think the Supreme Court's going to make a narrow decision and say, look, the executive order is not the path to do this. If you want to make these changes, yada, yada, then redefine domicile, et cetera. And that's not what they did. They said, basically, if you're here and you give birth, you have a citizen child, which gives you access to everything. So in this decision, I'm trying to take some hope out of Kavanaugh's concurrent/dissent, which says basically maybe Congress could get in there and start tweaking definitions on what domiciled means. Now that you've had a little bit of time to digest it, what are some of our options?
Well, yeah, Kavanaugh does hint at that, but even if Congress did that, then we would still only have 4 votes. Unfortunately, Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts, who authored the opinion, basically combined with the liberals, who give them everything they wanted, which is totally wrong. I mean, look, this is a really, really long opinion, but for example, Thomas eviscerates Roberts' opinion, and Alito does the same thing. He goes through how, there's a line in Alito's dissent talking about the supposed history of the citizenship clause that the majority has, and he says every step of this story is incorrect. In other words, Roberts gets it completely and totally wrong. And he's making, I think, the 2 biggest mistakes of his entire career on the court is this case and the Obamacare case.
And it doesn't matter. We're stuck with it, though. So here's my question. Alito eviscerates and Thomas eviscerates Justice Roberts. And Kavanaugh, though concurring with the decision to reject the executive order's use, but provides a pathway. Is this potentially a way to get another case before this court and get Roberts to rein in himself a little bit, or even Barrett to rein herself in? Because it does seem like this is, he's not a dumb man and she's not a dumb woman. It seems like the logic's beneath them.
Well, that might be a method of doing it, but trying to get a bill like that through Congress, you think the Democrats are against the SAVE Act, which require proof of citizenship. They would shut down Congress to avoid any change that would allow a law to go forward saying that the children of illegal aliens are not U.S. citizens. Yeah, or just a redefinition of domiciled.
If they clearly define domicile, which is what Kavanaugh suggested they do,
right?
Define what domiciled means. So it's kind of mushy. We're asked to define it. So you define it. Getting the definition of domiciled through. Or here's something though that maybe they could do, and that is to say, if you're on a visitor visa, that's not domiciled. Just you're not domiciled on a visitor visa. You can hold everybody harmless and then just change that stuff going forward. And on the surrogacy, pay for U.S. citizenship. Maybe they've got a chance on that. Question though, what could the executive do? Can the executive do anything? Deciding what the rules for issuing visas are, changing the definitions that are used to create the H-1B visas, for instance, or the student visas, for instance. Could they explicitly say that you are committing a crime, you're in violation of the law, if whatever, X, Y, or Z? I don't know. Can they do that? Can they just say, we're not taking people from countries that have a high propensity of birthplace tourism?
Yes. The president, through the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security, has a great deal of executive authority over temporary visitors to the U.S. And I think there is a lot of pretty severe restrictions the president could put in. Now, those would end up in court again, but even though Trump lost this case, when it comes to executive authority over immigration issues, the president just had a string of victories at the Supreme Court in several cases, all of which were decided 6-3. In all of those cases, Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett were on the correct side.
Right. TPS, asylum claims, et cetera. And I mean, just Trump has been on a roll, and they do seem to, the majority of the court at least seems to be comfortable with executive authority. So we should talk about a case that isn't directly applicable, but maybe indirectly applicable just in the thinking of the majority on the Supreme Court. And that's the Slaughter case. That's the FTC case.
Right.
So that one just seems like it has no relation whatsoever. But what it essentially said, the court essentially said was, yes, under Article 2, the president has the authority to manage the executive agencies in ways that advantage, himself on behalf of the voters. So does maybe that give us something to be hopeful about with a future Supreme Court case?
Well, it does. And this is, look, that case won't get as much attention as the birthright citizenship case, but that is the biggest strike against the administrative state. All these alphabet agencies that have sprung up in Washington over the past 100 years, the FTC, the FEC, the SEC, all of which can come after you and prosecute you for violating the law, and over which the president has almost no authority. And what happened in the Slaughter case is he fired one of the commissioners that heads the Federal Trade Commission, and she sued and said, well, you can't do that, because what has Congress been doing for 100 years? They've been setting up these agencies and saying the president can't fire the heads of these agencies except for cause. There's something they've done badly wrong, malfeasance in office. He can't just get rid of them because they were appointed by a different president and refused to carry out his policies, the policies that voters elected him to put into place. And in the Slaughter case, Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional. So all the limits that Congress has put in, they're out the window. And that actually means all these bureaucrats who up until now were basically unanswerable to voters, suddenly they are accountable. The president can actually fire them if he thinks they're doing the wrong thing. And that's a good thing. Now, liberals may complain about it. The three liberal justices did. But look, this will apply no matter who's in the White House. And that's the way it ought to be. The president's the head of the executive branch.
Right. So if within the confines of executive power, the president decides we're going to get really tough on how we're going to issue temporary visas, what countries from which we're going to be taking workers, et cetera, the countries with low propensity to abuse our system, et cetera. But pretty good chance that this court is going to be comfortable with it. But back to the administrative state generally. I mean, think about, there's no such thing as an independent agency now. There should be no such thing as an independent agency. So there's no CFPB is not independent. Now, I don't know, maybe if you want to detail why it didn't apply to the Fed, but it did apply to all of these other so-called independent agencies, feel free. I think, some folks are kind of scratching their head on that one. But every other independent agency besides the Fed is covered under this Slaughter ruling, which is outstanding because it eliminates the concept of independent agencies.
No, that's right. The Federal Reserve, look, all these other agencies are just straight out executive branch agencies. The Federal Reserve is this weird creature It's like a combination of both a public and private organization. And the difference also is that in that case, the president actually used the statute to fire. He wasn't contesting the statute. He actually used the statute to fire Lisa Cook, saying she was guilty of malfeasance because she potentially engaged in mortgage fraud. So the viability of that statute wasn't actually an issue in that case. And the case is still going on. All the court said was, we're not going to dissolve the injunction. Prevents the president from actually firing her while this is being litigated. So what the lower courts are going to look at is, well, did he actually have good grounds to fire her?
There you go. So that clarifies a lot, because the case is just, we're just not going to dissolve an injunction. This case is hot. This case is not over. The case, the Lisa Cook case is still very, very much in play. Everything else, though, I mean, you name the so-called independent agency. I've got to believe that CFPB, National Labor Relations Board, FCC, FTC, you named them. Anything that has a head that could survive the end of an administration is one of those things that would be called an independent agency. So most of the ones I just named do have these. They'll name a figurehead, and that person can survive a presidential administration. End of the Obama administration, you're stuck, potentially with the same person at the CFPB, et cetera. So that's huge. And again, it suggests a deference to executive authority over the executive branch. And so maybe within the confines of Article 2, whatever the president can muster to try to, maybe ameliorate this horrible birthright citizenship question, and that gets run by this court again, maybe we'll have a modicum of success, Hans.
Yeah, it could be. And look, we shouldn't forget, we did get terrific decision from the court on saying that states can ban biological males from participating in women's sports.
We got a good First Amendment decision on campaign finance, which I'm not going to have time to get into. And we got a great decision on temporary protected status. We got a fantastic decision on asylum claims. And so, this is one. I hope the smart lawyers in the Trump administration are sitting down and they've sharpened their pencils. And they've decided to pour themselves a nice bourbon to get at this one, because letting this stand could be a disaster. Hans von Spakovsky, thank you so much for joining me on the program today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you from Advancing American Freedom, and we will take a break on the Vicki McKenna Show.